we are going to start off here with our two presenters that you see on the screen. We have Barry and we have Phillip. We'll give a brief background on each of them. So let's start with Barry. He, like I said, he is probably part of a lot of FCO and digital marketing stuff, but from what I gather, and my opinion is he's probably one of the most prominent and most experienced people when it comes to Google updates, SEO. He's very well known and respected in search engine optimization. Like I said, he's the CEO of Rusty Brick, part of Search Engine Roundtable, and a news editor for Search Engine Land. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Barry. We are definitely grateful to have him with us. And then he will be joined by Phillip Thune, who is not only the commissioner of the Digital Marketing League, he is our CEO here at Textbroker. He's got 20 plus years of industry experience specializing in SEO and content marketing and content production. Being the CEO of Textbroker makes sense. So that being said, I will go ahead and turn the time over to him. I'll stop sharing my screen and you guys can go ahead.
I don't think we hear you. That was a tough question you started off with.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Cody, and thanks, Barry, for really kicking us off here, our first U.S. Digital Marketing League. You know, Cody was mentioning all the different things you do. I'm going to be a guest on your video series on SEO Roundtable. I guess we shot the video, but I don't think it goes live until next month. In that video, we started with my background, so I'd kind of like to start by turning the tables. How did you get interested in SEO? How did that lead to your current status? As Cody said, is probably the leading authority on Google and SEO, at least among people who don't work at Google, and I guess also why? Why have you found it so interesting?
All right, so how did I get started? So I got started in the early 2000s, maybe 2001 or so. It was basically a client coming to, we built a lot of websites back then. Now we build more software, but we used to build a lot of websites back then. The client was like, how do these search engines work? How do I get to the top of like Alta Vista and Excite, back the old search engines back in the day? I'm like, it's a good question. So I started just searching around. I found some online forums, and it was really just a wonderful community. People in the SEO forums back then, the search forums back then. Webmaster World was around then. Gym World, SEO Chat. These old forums, some of them are no longer around. It was just a really wonderful community of people like really just passionately tracking what's going on and changing in search. Obviously, when Google started coming around and the Google dances, it made it even more exciting. And just the change of how fast things were changing in search back then, and now even more so, it's just so interesting to me. So it just kind of something that I thought was like, oh, this is so exciting. This is so interesting. I want to learn more about how these search engines work. And it's pretty much stuck with me. I just started a blog in 2003 covering those changes based on what the search community was talking about. And I used to pretty much just document what are the most interesting conversations going on within the SEO and SEM community. And it just really went from there. I just love covering it.
That's right. And maybe we could do another session with you on time management, because you're publishing like 10 times a day on Search Engine Roundtable, you're on Twitter, and all that is, as you said, is in your spare time because you're running a web development company. Yes,
I'm very into a specific type of routine and being consistent. So if you have a routine and you're consistent, you get a lot of things done in a day. I joke that I just got, at least from this window over here, blinds that go up and down themselves, automated, like IKEA smart blinds, and it does it by itself. But it saves me like 10 seconds in a day of not having to put the blinds up manually and stuff like that. So every little second you can squeeze out of your day makes a big impact overall in your whole entire day.
Makes sense. All right, so let's dive into some search topics that can help our audience. I'll start by saying I hate the universal advice that comes from Google and comes from most SEO experts, which is to ignore Google and just focus on making your site as good as possible for your customers. Of course, you should make your site as good as possible, but that advice drives me crazy, and I'll start with a quick story why. In 2004, at a previous company, we owned screensavers.com with an S. For the search term screensavers, we came up second on Google's organic results behind screensaver.com without an S. Both sites offered lots of really cool screensavers, which were much more of a thing back then. So if you went to their site, you weren't going to come back to Google and then go to our site or vice versa. Our offerings were very similar. So it annoyed us that screensaver.com ranked above us for the search term screensavers. So we hired an SEO agency for about $10,000. I honestly don't know what they did. Could have been Black Hat back then. But about a month later, we were ranking first and screensaver.com was second. The revenue impact from that flip in position was $1 million a year. So maybe one of the best returns on investment I've seen in my career. Spend $10,000, move up one spot, don't do anything else, and make $1 million more in revenue, which was almost 100% profit. And today, for really important keywords like laptop computer or best toys, I know one spot might be worth $100 million or more to a big company. So Barry, I'm sure you hear these stories like this all the time. What's your response to that when someone says they can't ignore Google? It just has too much of an impact on their business.
Right. No. So what you were talking about was a long, long time ago, and I think a lot of the speakers on this event today will have that experience of a long, long time ago. And we were all making a lot of money in very competitive niches because there was little competition out there. And ranking and manipulating Google back in the old days was super easy. I mean, one of the things is I was ranking #1 for H&R Block for their name right above them during tax season. They didn't pay me a dime in the affiliate stuff because I don't know what happened with that. But I just pushed a lot of links, which Jim probably talk about, and
right.
Pretty much got my site to rank above H&R Block. It was very easy back in the early 2000s. Now, back then it was really about specific types of ranking factors, links, content, lots of page rank and stuff like that. Today, Google's a little bit more sophisticated. It is a lot associated with making a really great website. So can you technically make a really great website and totally ignore Google and still rank well? Potentially, yes. But there will always be things that you could go ahead and say, if I hire an SEO, I could squeeze out more traffic and more revenue from my website through an SEO. So I wouldn't ignore SEO. I don't think Google ever said to ignore SEO. SEOs help Google get more qualified content in their search engine, especially when it comes to building out all these like JavaScript frameworks and making sure that content gets in the index. Back in the old days, it was about making sure your CMS platform was search engine friendly. So things have changed over the years, but I think it's more aligned today than it ever was around making the best type of website possible and somewhat ignoring Google.
Right. Yeah. There's no doubt that they get better and better at basically foiling the tricks, right? The tricks there were a lot more tricks 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So they do a better job of that. And so, yeah, a lot of times, I guess you're only left with, hey, let's just focus on this. But yeah, no, it always frustrates me because, we hear that from our customers all the time. A lot of the people are using Textbroker. They're creating content for their audience, but they've got one real big eye on Google and how's that content gonna help them rank. I guess along those kind of same lines, there's sort of a similar question. You interview lots of SEO experts, and while I note in those interviews, you always say you believe Google when they publicly say something about what their search engine does or doesn't do. You've had a fair number of guests who say they don't believe Google. For example, Google says user experience is a key ranking factor, meaning did the user get what they wanted when they searched, they clicked on a Google result and got to the resulting page. And yet Google says they don't use the massive data they have from Google Analytics, from the Chrome browser to determine rankings. And that seems strange, right? Because with analytics in the browser, Google can see how many pages on that site you visit, how long you were there, did you buy something? So it seems crazy that they would not use all of that data, but they say they don't. And some leading SEO experts say to you on camera that they think Google is lying. For our audience, how should they think about this? Believe Google, don't believe them? What's the best path to SEO success?
The truth is, it doesn't matter, honestly, if they're lying or not. I mean, in terms of what you're going to do, it doesn't really matter. I mean, do you trust Google or not? It doesn't make a difference. What Google's asking you to do and what you should be doing are exactly the same thing that will improve your conversions on your website, improve your user engagement, and make a happier user when they go to your website. So it doesn't matter if they're lying. You should still make your website fast. You should still make your website that users want to come to, that they want to share, that they have a great navigation and user experience across. So I don't think it necessarily matters if they're lying or not. I just really do believe them that they're saying, hey, we don't use Google Analytics data for tracking time spent on it. They don't use that type of user experience data because I think they're really good at figuring out based off of how they index and crawl and so forth, if that website will be a good user experience. I don't know how exactly they do that. They have different signals that kind of, I guess, correlate to figuring out if a person really engages with your website. Maybe it's the content, maybe it's the way the page is laid out, stuff like that. But I do believe them that they're saying that when they say that they don't use pogo staking, they don't use click-through rates, they do not use time spent on a page as a ranking factor. I just think if you do have those good metrics, it often correlates to having other things that are good, like your content's great, your user experience is great, and stuff like that. It's just people who invest more time and money into their pages often also have more resources and money invested in other areas that help with their rankings.
Got it. So you don't think they're even measuring if somebody goes to Google, they click on the first result, they bounce back within 5 seconds and click on a different result? You don't even think that's sort of part of what they're looking at?
They said they don't. They don't look at that. They say it's a very, very messy or fuzzy metric. It's easy to exploit. I know search engines back in the day called direct hit used to use that metrics like that, and they just hired a bunch of people on Fiverr, not then, back it was maybe India or something, to just click on stuff and stay there and do, or ruin your competitors by clicking back. It's just very easy to manipulate, and they use other methods to, I guess, figure out would this website do well in those areas or not. So I do believe them because it's so easy to, it used to be so easy to manipulate Google. I don't think they want to use metrics that are very easily manipulated.
Good point. Okay. I think that kind of is a good segue into what we see. Textbroker, we're in a really interesting position, right? We get to see trends in what, we've got thousands of clients. We get to see trends in what they're ordering when it comes to content. Our clients come from every industry. They're from companies tiny to huge, but they pretty much all care about SEO. And we would never give away what one client was doing, but the trends across thousands of clients can be pretty instructive. For example, for the last decade, every year we've seen the average number of words our clients want go up. So in 2013, for example, the average word per order was on Textbroker was 272. Clients said, hey, give me these articles. And when we averaged out, the word length, it was 272 words. Last year, it was 577. So more than double in about a 6-year span. And this year, it's up about another 100 words to 670. So I want to be clear, that's an average across millions of orders. Some are very short, some are very long. So I'm not saying the ideal piece of content is 670 words. All I'm saying is that clearly smart SEOs are requesting higher and higher word counts, each year that goes by. And to me, that seems like somewhat of a disconnect, right? Everything I read says our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And then we have Google telling us 2021 is the year they switch over completely to mobile first indexing. I think it's safe to say most people probably don't want to read 700, 1,000, 2,000 words on their phone. Maybe can you explain mobile first indexing, what it means, what our audience should be thinking about, and then comment on why we might be seeing that trend of longer and longer pieces of content despite shorter attention spans and mobile first indexing?
Right. So I guess mobile first. I explain. You want to explain what mobile first indexing is? That's the first step. All right. So mobile first indexing is, we probably should change the name to mobile only indexing, but basically mobile first indexing started about in 2016, where Google said we're going to start to crawl the web as a smartphone would actually see it. So instead of you going to www.textbrokers.com, you would go to on your desktop, on the Chrome browser on your desktop, and look at it there. You would actually go on your mobile phone and see how it renders there. And Google said most of the queries are getting were on mobile devices. So we're trying to, and that's just going to grow and grow. So we're going to try to go ahead and make sure we fully understand and represent our search results based on how people are searching, which is mobile. So Google started that process in 2016, and by March 2021, every website on the web will be only crawled using the mobile Googlebot. the mobile version of Googlebot. It doesn't mean if you have a desktop-only site that is not mobile friendly that it won't it be indexed. Google will just index it like it would, like you'll see it'll be like a really small font and everything, and that's how Googlebot will see it. But if you have a mobile version and a desktop version, and the content between the two, or the schema, structured data, title, metadata, links, navigation, if that stuff is not the same across multiple sites, if you're not building a responsive website, I guess, or the content is not the same, and those things are not the same, then Google's not going to be looking at the desktop version. It's going to be looking at the mobile version. So probably your site has, anybody watching this, probably your site has moved over already. But if it hasn't, and Google moves your site over to the mobile version of indexing, and the sites are not the same, your rankings might change. So that's a concern. It might go up, it might go down, but Google's, if you haven't moved over yet, there probably are issues between your mobile and desktop site, because Google moved over sites that they think would have less of an impact. So any questions about that, or should I move on to?
No, that makes sense.
So the second part was
the fact that smart
yes.
SEOs, or at least the people who use Textbroker, who for the most part are pretty smart about SEO, ordering longer and longer pieces of content despite shorter attention spans. And right, if Google's looking at the mobile version of your site, you're probably not best user experience to have 2,000 word articles, on that you expect people to read on the phone.
So I'm not okay. So yes, people are ordering longer or ordering longer content forms. People are writing longer content forms for sure. The question is why people's attention spans are getting less. So the interesting part about it is they're not just writing really long content, they're structuring that content in a really nice way. So the headers, the anchors, it's very, very bite-sized, and they have nice images and stuff like that. So they're really making long-form content that can be consumed in bite-sized pieces as you scroll through it, even on mobile. So on mobile, you see lots of long-form content with the ability to click on little spaces and it expands, like accordions and stuff like that. Right. So, and Google says previously, before mobile first indexing, Google would not index content how they are with mobile first indexing. So they know a good user experience on mobile is to have expandable areas, because they want long form content, because people want to access, I guess, all the content on one page and see the overview of a specific topic, and then to drive down deeper into a specific topic, which is interesting, which kind of will go into passive indexing later. But I think it's not just about buying, instead of 200 words of content and now buying, 5,000 words of content, or whatever that increase is. It's about how you structure that content and making sure that content is structured in a really nice way that users who have low attention spans could just scroll through and read the headlines in those areas.
No, and that's great advice. And we definitely see that, in the briefings that our clients are giving to our authors, right? There are a lot of requests for bullet points and making sure there's a summary at the top. Yeah, it's just I guess my view on it is that if you're in a really competitive space, which we were talking about before, it used to be less competitive. Every year it's more competitive. Every year people are smarter about SEO and trying to do best practices and do what's in the best interest of their customers. And so to me, it almost seems like it's a competitive thing. Like, how, I'm new to this space. How am I going to crack into the first page of Google's results if I just have the same, 200 words, 300 words that everybody else does? There's no way I'm going to make a difference. Maybe the way I can make a difference is by being longer, by providing more information about this topic. Yeah, absolutely, structured in a bite-sized way so people can digest it, well. But that seems to me kind of my gut feeling, and from what we hear from clients is that that's what's driving it. It's more about the competition in this scenario, in the case of word length, as opposed to, hey, that's what I think is in the best interest of the person visiting my site.
Yeah, I agree. People are trying to outdo everybody and step it up, and that's the way everything works in this world. It's never enough, and it's always more and more. What can you do that's more and more? Which I guess maybe this pandemic is kind of like pushing us back a little bit in general. This is the lifestyle in general. It's like, I need a bigger car, I need a bigger house, I need a bigger, more expensive this, more expensive that. And I don't think that's going to change how content's developed and stuff like that. It's just the overall, like, theme that's been going on in the world. More money, more this, more that, more food, more everything. But again, to compete, you have to do more and more, and you have to, and stock prices have to go up and up, and you got to do whatever you can to do that, make that happen.
Hi, what, just thinking back on the last 12 months, and like you said, search is a space where things change, week to week. But if you think back the last year, maybe a little bit longer, what would you say maybe is the biggest change that you've seen that people, our audience might not realize is important from an SEO perspective? Anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of changes that has happened over the course of the year and things that are coming. Obviously, the big thing that's coming that everybody's aware of, and we discussed initially, was the mobile first indexing. So people are prepared for that. They've been preparing since 2016 for that. So I think hopefully by now everybody watching this knows about that. Just keep in mind, again, March 2021 is that date for that. The other thing is probably like the BERT change was pretty big. SEOs didn't really take notice to it, and now Google just recently announced it. It's used for almost 100% of queries. It initially launched a year ago at 10% queries in English languages, and now it's fully 100% of the queries done. And again, it's something that we don't really notice that much. In terms of like the biggest changes that SEOs have noticed in the past year, it's probably these core updates. I mean, without a doubt, these core updates affect SEOs more than they affect other people because SEOs are focused on rankings and so forth. And these core updates seem to have really pushed SEOs into saying, we need to build sites, like you said, have higher quality content, longer depth content that serve that purpose. So I think I think content is now king. I don't think anybody would say links are king anymore. It's really about that content and making sure that the content's the best. So these core updates, I think, is probably the biggest thing that affects small businesses to really, really large businesses. We haven't had a core update in almost 6 months, which is pretty intense. I hope Google does not release one now right before the holiday season, but they may. I don't know. But I think core updates need to have SEO's attention, making sure they read these papers on EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, making sure they understand that if in the health, medical, your money, your life categories, like life insurance and financial services, that they really understand that Google is treating those types of queries in a more conservative fashion and only showing more trustworthy, authoritative, and expert level types of content. So you have to make sure that if you are trying to compete in that space, that your content is above and beyond anything else out there. And I mean, if you do searches for COVID, I mean, you can see what Google is doing to make sure the right information is being served up to the right types of people, because they're really, really nervous about providing misinformation around stuff that could really harm people physically, emotionally, financially, and so forth. So those are very, very important areas that if you're in those spaces, you need to worry about. And I know a lot of people, even Google back in the day when I called that update the medic update, people were like, it's not just affecting health sites. I'm like, I know it's affecting other financial sites and this type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, YMYL came out, EAT, and now Google executives are even talking about how they care more, and they actually weight different types of signals differently based on it being health related or medical related. So again, nobody knew back then that what was going on with the medic update. I didn't even know. It was just interesting. I just saw what was going on. So I think that's very important if you're in those spaces. And I think it's going to be expanded to more and more spaces because again, it doesn't hurt to have the most authoritative and trustworthiness types of content for any space. The upcoming thing with page experience update, I think SEOs are going to really be focused on that. I don't think it hurts for them to focus on that. I just don't think it's going to be as important and make that much of a splash when it goes live. I don't know when it's going live. It's not going to be live for at least 6 months from today because Google said they will give us 6 months notice, and they haven't given us that 6 month notice yet. But I think that will come out at some point, and that's obviously core web vitals. That includes page speed, HTTPS, mobile interstitials, all the stuff that they already have, plus a little bit more on the core web vital side. Again, stuff that SEO has been doing so far, but I really don't think it's going to be that much of a big signal. So those are the things that I think SEOs need to be concerned about. And then I think this passage into indexing thing, which was announced a week or so ago, they said it's going to be 7% change in the search results from this, an improvement. The question is, I think it's going to be more focused on I think it's going to be more involved around long form content. So you're going to need more long form content that is structured really nicely for Google to rank that long form content well.
Right, I want to ask you about that, but just one reminder, if you, I've got a few more questions for Barry, then we're going to turn it over to the audience. So if you've got any questions, you can ask Barry anything, just put your question in the chat, and then Cody will write those down, and he'll come back on and ask us. Yeah, Barry, good segue in terms of passage indexing, because I was going to, I was thinking about the questions I wanted to ask you, and I was going to ask you if the era of big changes like Panda and Penguin are over. And then Google announces that passage indexing is coming and it's going to impact 7% of all queries, which is a big number. Maybe you can explain passage indexing, given that it has some people confused. And then, do you think there are still some more major advancements coming from Google, changes that could impact kind of 5-10% of all queries? Or do you think that, we're sort of, Google's done so much, for so long, that those kind of things are,
Right.
are be few and far between?
So passage indexing, which was announced at the Search On 2020 event, I think a week ago Thursday, so 8 days ago. It's not live yet. It's going to be live at the end of this year at some point. Google will tell us when it's live, and I'm sure I'll write about it. It's basically, and it's going to impact 7% of queries. That's a big number. If you look back at the percentages that Penguin updated, Penguin impacted when it first launched was, I think Penguin was about 3% or something like that when it first launched. And I think
Right.
Panda was like 11 point something percent, almost 12%. So those are, but I think Penguin impacted SEOs more than Panda because a lot of SEOs were doing link building back then. That's a side note, which is kind of related. So what passage indexing has nothing to do with indexing, just so you know. It's about ranking. Google said they are going to basically be able to look at a long form piece of content that's on a specific topic. Let's say it's about how to write content, and you have a long section, a piece of content on how to write content. And then you have subsections around how to write content. You might have a section about how to write, how to include images in that content, how to include subheads in those content. And that story or that piece of article could rank well for how to write content, but it also could rank well for how to embed images properly in your content and how to, variations of the subheads. And Google's gonna be able to zone in or zoom into a specific passage or passages on a specific page and be able to rank those individual passages better than it was beforehand. So now a single page technically can rank for many, many variations of keywords, which is pretty cool. In addition, it's gonna, again, I think that's gonna impact the way people write. We'll see. I think SEOs have to test it once it goes live. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I don't know if this is going to be as big as an impact as Penguin was for SEO, the SEO industry, or not. It's hard to say because BERT is, had a 10% impact, I think, when they first launched or something like that, and we didn't really notice that impact because it was basically a way of Google understanding how the query relates to the content, and Google understands content differently. And this is similar. Google's gonna be able to understand your content slightly differently. It's kind of and rank that content slightly differently. So I'm not sure how much SEOs will notice this change. So I think there's two things. How big of an impact does a big Google update impact SEOs and webmasters versus how much it impacts the search results? And it's kind of like a weird question to ask because I know Google said, one Googler actually taunted me like, oh, we launched this feature, I don't know what it was, maybe Hummingbird or something, and you guys didn't even find it. You didn't write about the fluctuations in the search results or the changes. I'm like, I write about fluctuations every day, so how can you say I didn't write about it? But it was a joke. But in short, what's big for Google, what big changes in terms of what Google measures might be very small for SEOs and webmasters versus what's big for SEOs and webmasters might affect a smaller percentage of all the search results that Google is aware of.
Got it. I mean, do you think there's things can you see things that are coming where you can have that big? I mean, I feel like when's the last time, is it BERT? When's the last time that Google had, a change that was so big, it was kind of close to the 10% mark in terms of changing queries?
I guess it was BERT. The core updates are felt a lot stronger than BERT was felt. So all these core updates really have really get the SEO community buzzing like crazy. The forums light up, Twitter lights up, Facebook lights up. It's insane when these core updates happen. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Google never gives me percentages anymore on these core updates. They used to give updates on Panda and Penguin. But when they announce stuff like this, like a mobile first indexing change is big for Google. It's a big infrastructure change. It's big in terms of how Google indexes. It's big for them. Page speed is a specific thing that they've announced, but they say it's going to affect the results in a very small way. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Well, I think another big update will be released at some point. 100%. Google's constantly making updates. Core updates we're due one soon. So yeah, that will happen. I don't think you ever will see Google stop doing it unless they get out of search.
We were talking last week, and I asked, is there something, if you could wait, if you were in charge of Google, is there something you feel like they are not doing, some obvious hole where you're like, wow, if they could somehow achieve this, it would make search a lot better?
Yeah, so one of my pet peeves is that when people write articles that are timely, that they don't put dates on it. I can't stand it. Or they change the dates. You see this a lot where Google publishers, even in larger publishers, will update the dates constantly so that Google will rank it better or rank it as new in the top stories carousel. And then you read something that looks like it's new, but you're not sure if it's new and it has no date on it, and you don't know, and you try to figure out if it's new or not. That's my pet peeve. I wish Google will have some type of, if the story deserves to have a date on it and it doesn't, kind of ding it a little bit, or at least Google tell us what the date would be, because Google probably knows approximately when it was published.
Got it. Just one or two more things, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience. So again, I see some questions coming in, which is great. Feel free to ask anything. Other things in the news, and I think this will be in the news for a while, right? Is Google and antitrust, right? So is Google a monopoly, and if they are, does that impact them? Even if there's the lawsuit itself doesn't impact them. Clearly just the fact that you get sued, sometimes a company kind of changes its practices or thinks about things differently. I think for our audience and for SEOs in general, right, the one thing that frustrates them, and there's nothing they can do, is that Google's, clearly over time been trying to provide the answer to your question on Google. So making it so that people don't necessarily have to click on any of the links and go to a different website. And so, I think it's hard to argue that that's a pretty good user experience. But if you're in the, SEO game and all you're thinking about is how do you get traffic to your website, it can be very frustrating. I know it's pure speculation because it's still early days here, but do you see Google thinking about that differently as a result of this, or anything else you think that might kind of give them pause because of this?
So I think it's going to force them to, there will be changes. I don't know if there'll be changes around how feature snippets work per se. Initially, when Google launched featured snippets, I had a meeting with a bunch of people and the head of search back then. And I'm like, you're blatantly, I said, I probably didn't say it in a respectful way, but basically saying you're ripping off content from these publishers, not even linking to them. Back then there was no link even. It was just a feature snippet, and it wasn't even a link to the site. And the guy's like, we are focused on answering the question that our searchers are asking us. That's our goal, to make sure searchers are getting the answers they want. I'm like, okay, but you're getting it from here, whatever. Anyway, multiple variations. I think it's done in a nice way now where the link is pretty big. People, I think nowadays, webmasters and SEOs nowadays do want to be in the feature snippet spot. They rather be there than be 2 listings down or 3 listings down. So I think for the most part, I think our SEOs are okay with that. And I think that's part of the argument that they made to the Department of Justice, saying, feature snippets send traffic. I wish Google would actually show us that traffic. They don't give us a way to actually see that in Search Console. It's easy for them to add a feature snippet filter. They know they're tracking it. They're just not passing that data to us. Right. I hope they will. They haven't. I think they're hiding something there. So we'll see. But I do think you'll see changes based on the Department of Justice. This is probably the single biggest, maybe probably in there will be today and throughout their probably future history, the biggest lawsuit they'll ever have to deal with. So I do suspect there will be changes that have to be made. It happened in Europe already, where the European courts have issued required changes from Google, and they made those changes. The US has been very, very lax about it over the years. I think rightfully so. I think it's very easy for, not very easy, but I think Google came out of nowhere, built a search engine. They didn't have the operating system. They didn't have the mobile phone, Android. They didn't have the computers, Chromebooks. They didn't even have a browser, Internet Explorer and Chrome, whatever. Now they have all of that, but when they first launched and overtook Alta Vista, Yahoo, all these search engines back in the day, they didn't have any of that. Microsoft launched, made Bing the default browser on their browsers, on their Microsoft Windows environment, and they still did not really compete. So I think they do have a point when it comes to it is possible for people to compete in that space if they can provide a better user and better search experience. But I think it's much harder these days because Google's so far ahead of the game than anybody else. So I think we'll see changes. I don't know if those changes, forcing those changes are correct. I'm not a lawyer, but I do think we'll see changes.
Right. No, I think one of the obvious questions is, okay, maybe Google, if you just think about the search engine, not all those other things, maybe Google is kind of a monopoly there. But what's the alternative, right? You've got Bing, which has a decent share, I think, because some people probably just default into using their browser. But yeah, does this? Again, it's early days, I guess, so it's hard to say. But how much do you think about Bing? Because maybe this is an opening for Bing to get more share, to pay Apple even more than Google pays them for that sort of premium space on the iPhone. How often do you think about Bing? What do you think about Bing? Do you think from an SEO perspective, should people be giving much thought to that? Or is it mostly just, keep thinking about Google given it's a 90% kind of share?
If you look at your analytics, it's mostly Google. So I think you have a certain amount of resources that you have on your SEO team and your team overall. Where are you going to put those resources? You're going to put the resources to where it matters the most, where it's going to give you the best bang for your buck. Now, Bing has great tools. Bing Webmaster Tools is amazing. Every SEO should be using it, not just for ranking well in Bing, but also ranking well in Google. Those tools are great and give you great data. If you master Google, focus on Bing for sure. If you have time, focus on Bing. I don't know if Bing's market share will increase based off of this. I just don't know, but we'll keep an eye on it. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long, long process. So it's not like one day you're going to wake up and be like, oh my God, Bing has 80% share. I need to switch everything over to Bing quick. And they work pretty much the same. They're not as good at crawling and indexing as Google. There are issues, but I think it's not going to be a huge leap. And you're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh my God, Bing is everything now.
Got it. All right. We're going to turn it back to Cody for some questions. Before we do that, Barry, you're constantly updating people, telling them what Google's doing, what they should be worried about. What's the best way to follow you? Is it Twitter? Is it SEO Search Engine Roundtable? Give people kind of the ways you like people to follow you.
I'm very active on Twitter, so at Rusty Brick on Twitter. If that's too much activity, just go to Search Engine Roundtable or Search Engine Land, and definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's also youtube.com/RustyBrick. I produce 2 videos a week, one with personalities like you, and the other video on Friday recapping all the SEO news in about a 10 or so minute video. So if you don't have time to read all the things every day, you don't want to listen to it, or you don't have to watch it, just listen to it. It's a great way to catch up very quickly on what happened in the SEO world and SEM world.
Got it. All right. Thank you. So Cody, we're going to bring you back. I'm going to get up for a second because the sun is coming right in on my eyes. But Cody's been looking at the questions that all of you have been asking, and kick us off.
Great. So first of all, I think I speak for the audience in saying that a lot of great information was provided. It sparked a lot of questions. So Barry, you can obviously see them so you can read them, but I'll ask them to you just so they're there. And we'll just start at the top. And so the first one says, Barry, thanks for your time. What do you envision for the future in terms of websites versus other ways to publish, distribute, and consume content, i.e. PWAs, native apps, augmented reality?
Yeah, so we went through this native app component back in the early iPhone app days, maybe like 10 years ago. Apps are going to take over the world, websites are going out. That didn't really happen. Then PWAs came out, that's going to take over the world, and apps and websites are going to go out of business, and you're not going to really need SEO and search engines because there's going to be, an app store, and you just search the app store, the PWA store. Not happening. Augmented reality, I don't know. That's not really happening. I think websites are here to stay. Yes, they have to be mobile friendly. You could do really cool stuff with PWAs. You could do really cool stuff with push notifications. Websites could be definitely more appy. But yeah, if there is a future, and the future is probably still the website.
Great. Thanks. So Shane asks, if you have a health-related website, does the medic update rank sites higher if they link to official doctors' LinkedIn pages or .edu sites, or can you just rely on content quality?
That's a good question. So initially Google said, yeah, if you want us to trust your website, make sure the citations are there, make sure we know who the people who are writing the content. It does help that the doctors write it. How do we know if there's a doctor who's writing it? Maybe you need to have a doctor profile. Linking to a doctor's LinkedIn profile, I don't know if that's going to make a difference, but you should definitely have the author's profile on the website, citing those references, citing their qualifications. Does linking to EDU sites make a difference? I doubt it. I don't think it makes a difference. Google has said no, EDUs don't make a difference, .orgs don't make a difference. But I think most importantly, content quality. I think the content quality of the articles that person produces, as well as the content quality of the bios, showing they have certifications, maybe a photo of them in a white jacket, stuff like that. I don't know if that matters exactly, but it's good. It's interesting to test.
Awesome. All right, so the next one says, hello, thanks for the nice presentation. Will the number of backlinks versus the quality of backlinks lose importance in the future?
So, I mean, number of backlinks used to matter very early days, like early 2000s, then became the quality of those backlinks, more high quality backlinks versus less low quality backlinks. And I think that's not going to change. I think backlinks are still very important. I think it's always about high quality backlinks.
Great. So Robert asks, launching a new site, what are the 3 lowest hanging pieces of fruit to consider in site design from an SEO aspect? My company and I have never invested anything, time, energy, or cash in SEO.
So that depends on taking a quick look at the site. If your site has tons of pages and no title tags, and you just say homepage, changing your title tags will make a huge difference. If you have a JavaScript website and for some reason Google cannot see any of the pages, that makes a huge difference to make it search engine friendly. If you have a no index and you're blocking Google, just removing that no index will have a massive change. So it really depends on where the website is right now versus what you need to do. Sometimes it's just really about amplifying it and getting shares and links to the site and stuff like that. It really depends on a site-by-site basis, so it's hard to say.
Great, and kind of just to, I guess, piggyback onto that is, and I guess to push people over to you again, is if you don't have a lot of money to invest in SEO right now, but you do have the time and energy, I would highly recommend reading what Barry posts or what other SEOs post, because that's a great way to get these answers of what you need to be doing. There's a lot of great information out there. Just make sure it comes from a reputable source. But yeah, I think that's a good thing to do. And then Cassandra, who is actually part of our team, she asks, how will mobile first affect social media content creators?
I don't think it will. I'm not sure how it would. I'm not sure if she could explain that in more detail, but I don't think it will have any effect on anything.
Then the next question says, if higher word count really works so well for SEO, why are so many articles with less than the average word count for that of the particular topic ranking above the longer pieces? Many of these articles are posted on web pages that have poor design and poor blog structure.
Right, so sometimes just answering the question, having a shorter, more direct answer works well. I write in a shorter form, not necessarily because I think it might rank better, more because I think I want to get to the point right away and not take up my reader's time by writing all this fluff around everything. I write a specific answer to a specific question. How many links could Google crawl on a specific web page? I want to get to the point right away instead of having a long intro. Wait till you get, you see these YouTube videos. We're going to talk about this. All right. And then they start talking about stuff and they're like, keep listening. We're going to tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you how to do it. and then eventually they do it. I think getting to the point often is very useful. Like you said, shorter attention spans. And I'm very interested to see how passage indexing might change the answer to your question. So I think right now, yeah, shorter forms often do rank well. Not always. It depends on the type of query and area. But I wonder how passage indexing will change all that. So it's a to be determined when passage indexing launches.
Cool. Let's see. Frank asks, are there any benefits to posting your content on other blogs and linking back to your original content on your website?
Maybe. I personally like to post my original content on my sites and not on like Medium and other third-party websites. Although sometimes if your website just doesn't rank well, you might want to be like, all right, I need to get the exposure for my brand and my company. I'll just post it on a site that ranks well and get that exposure. So if somebody wants to contribute to in the SEO space and SEM space to search engine land because they want to get more exposure, that's a great way of doing it. Not necessarily you don't want to contribute to third-party websites for getting links back to your site, because I wouldn't focus on that. That's a whole thing around guest blogging, and you do that, and it might be against Google's guidelines. But focus on building out content on really well-known websites, because it will drive exposure to you, increase your authoritativeness in the area, your expertise level in the area, and help your brand overall. I wouldn't necessarily worry about anything else there. Just do it for the exposure, really.
Okay, and Frank also has some follow-up questions. I'll read them both to you so you can kind of get a grasp of what he's asking. But he says, are some blogs better than others, or is it more about domain authority? And then he said, the reason I'm asking is I found software that can post an article in 2,000 WordPress blogs overnight.
So are blogs better than others, or is that's the question?
Yeah, are some blogs better than others, or is it more about domain authority?
So domain authority is not a Google metric. DA has no impact on Google's rankings. DA just tries to measure and figure out what Google might, how Google might rank your website. It's a Moz metric. I'm not into Google, so don't worry about DA. Just ignore it. It's not an important metric. What do you mean better than others? I think it's hard. The whole question is a little bit confusing to me. I don't know if you understand. You want to explain it in a different way. Are some blogs better than others? I mean, it's not. You want to be on a blog that if you're in an area, if let's say you're an expert in, I don't know, building toy trucks, and there's one authoritative space on that. Like there's one blogger who's really, really into it, makes YouTube videos, is well known. You want to be on that person's channel. You want to be on that person's area. So yeah, be in the area that somebody who's an authoritative personality in that area, somebody who is an expert in the area, you want to be there. If you don't have your own place to do that at, you do it up slowly. It takes years and years to build up your own name. Also, you could contribute to that other person's stuff. So again, if you're an SEO and you want to build up your authority, Search Engine Land is a great place to do that because Search Engine Land has that authority already. It's not necessarily about Search Engine Land's DA. I have no idea what Search Engine Land's DA is. I never looked. I wouldn't focus on DA.
Okay, I guess the last question you kind of answered already, but they said is DA a scam? So I mean, you said I wouldn't worry about DA. I'm not saying it's
a scam. No, yeah. I mean it's a metric that all these link building tools, all these SEO tools have their own metrics. Tons of different tools have their own metrics to measure how Google might see a link or might determine how authoritative a page is. It's just one. It's not Google's metric. It's not a scam. It's just people think for some reason they sell links for DA and stuff like that. It's nothing to do with Google. Google doesn't look at DA. They don't have a feed from Moz looking at the Moz API to say, I'm going to rank this page better because it has a higher DA. It doesn't work that way. It's just a way of Moz trying to figure out a backwards engineer how well Google might see or how well Google might rank a page.
Perfect. And Jim brings up a good point. Jim Boykin from Internet Marketing Ninjas, he's going to be a presenter later on. He said he'll dive a little bit deeper into this. So if you're interested about DA and links, be sure to stick around. He's got some great information there.